At my grandson's birthday party, my daughter-in-law pointed at me and ordered, "Get this woman out. She doesn't belong at our table." The guests went silent. My son looked down at his plate. I walked away humiliated. Just a poor old woman, or so they thought. What Vanessa didn't know was that I owned the tower where she clocked in every morning, and tomorrow I would decide her future. I remember the night of Noah's birthday like it was yesterday. It should have been a happy day, one of those evenings where a grandmother simply gets to sit back, smile, and watch her little boy blow out candles. But for me, it became one of the most painful memories of my life. The party was held at Andrew and Vanessa's mansion in Beverly Hills. I had never really grown used to that house. It was so different from the homes I had known. Shiny marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like ice, and tables full of crystal glasses. Everything about it felt like a stage, as though we were all just actors in a play that Vanessa had directed. I arrived with a small gift bag in my hand. Inside was a sweater I had knitted for Noah. It was nothing fancy, just a soft blue yarn I'd chosen, because I knew it would bring out the brightness in his eyes. I'd spent weeks working on it, knitting in the quiet of my little apartment, imagining the look on his face when I handed it to him. That sweater carried every ounce of my love. When the heavy front doors opened, it wasn't Andrew who greeted me. It was Vanessa. She stood tall in her glittering gown, a glass of wine already in her hand. Her eyes swept over me the way people glance at a stranger they don't want to let inside. "Oh, you're here," she said, her tone flat, almost as if my presence was an inconvenience rather than a joy. I smiled gently and lifted the bag. "I brought something special for Noah." She didn't smile back. She didn't even move aside right away. Instead, her gaze lingered on my dress. It was the nicest one I owned, plain black, pressed carefully that morning, but in her eyes I could see it wasn't good enough. "Andrew is still getting ready," she said, finally stepping back. "The other guests are already here." Other guests? Andrew had told me it was just a small family dinner. I stepped inside and immediately I realized I had been misled. The living room was filled with people, polished, wealthy-looking couples who sipped champagne and laughed in low, careful tones. They spoke about vacations in Europe, about private schools for their children, about new business deals. I recognized a few faces from magazines and society pages. It felt less like a birthday and more like a networking event. And then, through the crowd, I heard the sweetest sound. "Grandma!" Noah's little voice cut through all the noise. He ran toward me, arms outstretched, and I gathered him close. For a moment, the world melted away. I pressed my cheek to his soft hair, which smelled of cake and childhood. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered. "I made you something special." But before I could pull the sweater out of the bag, Vanessa appeared beside us. She placed a hand on Noah's shoulder and pulled him back gently but firmly. "Noah, what did we talk about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first? Why don't you go play with your cousins?" The sting of her words settled into my chest. She didn't want me touching him, as if I wasn't good enough. Dinner was set at a long table that seemed to stretch on forever. Crystal glasses sparkled in the light, plates rimmed with gold, lined up like soldiers. I was placed at the very end of the table, far from Andrew and Noah, squeezed between an empty chair and one of Andrew's college friends, who barely remembered my name. He spoke loudly about his new business deal, barely pausing to breathe. I glanced toward Andrew, hoping to catch his eye. When our gazes met, he offered me the smallest smile, but it faded quickly when Vanessa whispered something into his ear. He looked away. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa's voice rose above the clinking of silverware. "So, Margaret," she said, smiling sweetly, though her words carried a bite. "Andrew tells me you're still running that little cleaning business of yours." Her choice of words, that little, wasn't lost on me. I straightened my shoulders. "Yes, I own a business." Vanessa laughed, a sound like glass breaking. She turned to the woman seated beside her. "She means janitorial work. Isn't that just the cutest thing?" "So humble." The woman forced a polite smile, but I noticed the way she subtly angled her chair away from me, as though being near me might somehow lower her own status. I had seen that movement before in my life, the quiet recoil of someone who thought they were above me. It cut just as deep as Vanessa's words. Around me, people carried on about vacation homes in Aspen and yachts in Monaco. I had nothing to add, and I realized they wouldn't care even if I did. Then came dessert. Noah managed to slip away from the children's table and climb onto my lap. His fingers, sticky with chocolate, rested on my arm. "Grandma, can you tell me the princess story? The one where she saves herself? My heart swelled. It was our tradition, a story I had invented years ago to teach him that strength comes from within. But before I could begin, Vanessa's voice sliced through the air. Noah, get down from there right now. Her face was flushed, her voice sharp enough to silence the entire table. But Mom, I want to hear Grandma's story. I said now. She yanked him off my lap, her movements harsh enough to make him whimper. Then her eyes turned on me. I think it's time for you to leave. The table went silent. Even the man bragging about his tech company stopped mid-sentence. Every eye in that glittering room turned to me. Vanessa, please, I whispered, my throat tight. It's Noah's birthday. Security, she called, though of course no security was actually there. Escort this woman out. She's disturbing our family dinner. Andrew stood slowly. My heart leapt for a moment, thinking he might finally defend me, but his face was pale, his lips pressed together. He said nothing. She's your mother? One of the guests muttered softly. Exactly, Vanessa sneered. And she doesn't belong here. Look at her. She's embarrassing Andrew. Embarrassing all of us. I don't remember how I rose from my chair or how my feet carried me across the marble floor. My ears rang with the sound of my own heartbeat, drowning out the murmurs of the guests. But I do remember one thing clearly. Noah's eyes. As I reached the door, I turned back and saw him standing there, small hands clenched into fists, his lips trembling as though he wanted to call out to me. I gave him a weak smile, though my vision was blurred with tears, and then the heavy doors closed behind me. The night air outside was cool against my hot cheeks. I stood there for a moment, fumbling with my car keys, trying to steady my hands. I had been humiliated, cast aside in front of strangers, treated like I was less than nothing in the home my son shared with his wife. But as I sat in my car, staring at the mansion's glowing windows in the distance, I made myself a promise. Vanessa thought she had taught me my place, but soon she would learn about hers. I drove home in silence that night. The streets of Beverly Hills, lit with polished cars and glowing street lamps, felt colder than ever. Behind me, the mansion still gleamed like a palace, full of laughter and chatter that no longer included me. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I tried to steady them, but every word Vanessa had thrown at me kept replaying in my mind. She doesn't belong here. She embarrasses us. Security, take her out. And Andrew, my Andrew, sitting there silent, staring at his plate as if his mother's shame wasn't his concern. The drive from Beverly Hills to my little apartment in Santa Monica was only 40 minutes, but it stretched like an endless road that night. At every red light, my reflection stared back at me in the windshield. Silver hair, tired eyes, and a dress that suddenly felt like rags. I thought of the boy Andrew used to be. I remembered mornings when I'd wake before sunrise, pack his lunch, and send him off to school with a kiss on his forehead. I remembered nights working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, cleaning offices, waitressing at diners, doing whatever I could, just so he could have shoes without holes and books for class. There were days I went without meals, but Andrew never knew. I always told him I wasn't hungry, even when my stomach ached. I remembered him at 12 years old, crying because a bigger boy pushed him down on the playground. He came home with scraped knees, and I held him as he sobbed into my shoulder. "Don't worry, Mom," he said through tears. "When I grow up, I'll protect you. I'll never let anyone hurt you." Those words echoed in my heart now, cruelly twisted by the reality of tonight. My little boy, the same boy who once swore to shield me, had sat by while his wife humiliated me in front of strangers. He didn't lift a finger. He didn't even lift his eyes. "Andrew," I whispered into the empty car, "how did we get here?" By the time I pulled into the small parking lot of my apartment building, the ocean breeze carried the familiar scent of salt and seaweed. My home wasn't much, just a modest place near the beach, the kind where the furniture was worn but comfortable, where the sound of the waves could lull me to sleep at night. It was a world away from chandeliers and polished marble, but it was mine. I sat there for a long time in the driver's seat, staring out at the dark horizon where the ocean met the night sky. A grandmother thrown out of her grandson's birthday, a mother abandoned by the son she'd given everything for. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I spoke softly to myself, a promise whispered into the night air. They may think I'm weak, they may think I'll stay quiet, but I won't let this happen again. I won't let silence be the thing that defines me. I pressed my palm against the steering wheel, steady now, no longer shaking. Vanessa wanted to teach me about my place, I whispered. But this time, I'll show her exactly where hers is. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I hadn't slept much, but strangely, I didn't feel tired. The humiliation of the night before was still heavy on my chest, but underneath it, something else had begun to stir. Determination. I slipped into a simple gray suit I had worn countless times before. Nothing glamorous, but clean, pressed, and enough to carry me through the day. As I pulled my hair into a neat bun, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes looked older than I remembered, not just from age, but from everything I had endured. Still, there was strength there, too. By 6:30, I was already on the freeway, heading north towards San Francisco. The drive took me past quiet neighborhoods, through stretches of coastal highway where the Pacific shimmered pale silver in the early light. With every mile, I felt the sting of Vanessa's words again. She doesn't belong here. She embarrasses us. She thought I was a pauper, someone to dismiss, to humiliate. She thought I had no place at her table, but she had no idea. When I pulled into the underground garage of the Walker Global Tech Tower, the building was still quiet, wrapped in the calm of early morning. It rose high above the skyline, a glass giant reflecting the pink hues of dawn. I remembered the first time I'd stood on this very street, more than 35 years ago, clutching nothing but a dream and a second-hand briefcase. Back then, people laughed at the idea of a middle-aged single mother starting a technology firm. They called me foolish. Some even said I was delusional. But I hadn't listened. I worked through nights, wrote code at the kitchen table, built a company from scraps of faith and sheer willpower. And now, here it stood, Walker Global Tech. My life's work, my legacy. The security guard at the front desk, Miguel, looked up as I entered. His face softened with a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker," he said warmly, standing a little straighter. "Good morning, Miguel," I replied. His respect was simple, genuine, nothing like the condescension I'd endured at that dinner table. As I stepped into the private elevator, I ran my hand over the cool metal railing. The ride up to the 42nd floor was smooth and quiet, giving me a moment to breathe. When the doors slid open, I was greeted by a long hallway of polished stone, leading to glass double doors etched with my name, Margaret Walker, founder and CEO. Inside, the office was bathed in morning light. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of San Francisco, the Bay Bridge stretching like a silver ribbon across the water. From up here, the city looked small, almost delicate, like a toy village. Yet last night, in a glittering mansion, I had felt smaller than I ever had before. I walked slowly toward the glass, resting my hand against the cool surface. My reflection looked back at me, just a grandmother in a plain suit. But beneath that reflection stood a woman who had built an empire, who signed the paychecks that kept thousands of families fed, who had turned struggle into power. Vanessa didn't know it. None of them did. And perhaps that was my fault. I had never flaunted what I had built. I never cared for appearances, for showing off. To me, success was always about survival, about giving Andrew a chance at the life I never had. I had kept my power quiet like a secret I didn't need to share, but last night had changed something. I thought of Noah's little hands reaching for me as I walked out the door. I thought of Andrew's silence, the way he let his wife strip me of dignity without a word, and I thought of Vanessa's cold smile as she dismissed me in front of her friends. My jaw tightened. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "No more. I won't let it pass this time." I turned away from the window and walked to my desk. On the mahogany surface, neatly stacked, were the files I needed to review that day. But one name already burned in my mind. Vanessa Carter Walker. She thought she could humiliate me because she believed I was powerless. Tomorrow she would discover the truth, and this time the silence would not protect her. The name was printed in bold letters across the top of the file, Vanessa Carter Walker. I had seen that name before far too many times. On invitations, on glossy social pages, on Andrew's lips spoken with pride, but never like this. Never in a manila folder tucked away in the company records of Walker Global Tech. She was listed as Marketing Manager, Digital Campaigns Division, hired 2 years ago. I already knew, of course, that her position wasn't earned the same way others had fought for theirs. She had Andrew's name attached to hers, and that alone had smoothed the way. In business, I'd never believed in shortcuts, but in family, I had chosen silence. I opened the folder and began to read. At first, the lines looked ordinary enough. Performance reviews with words like dynamic, ambitious, and innovative. But as I flipped through the pages, a different story started to show, and it was ugly. There were complaints, 3 of them. The first was from Linda Perez, my longtime assistant. She had been with me for more than 15 years, a woman of patience and grace, the kind of employee you could always rely on. At 61, she had become the quiet backbone of my office, keeping things steady when chaos swirled. Her complaint had described how, in a meeting, Vanessa had laughed at her for taking notes by hand. "So outdated," Vanessa had said in front of the entire team. Honestly, why do we keep people who can't even keep up with the century we're in? Linda had been devastated. She'd written, "I have never felt so small in all my years working here." I could almost hear her voice in those words, the quiet hurt of someone who had given her life to her work, only to be belittled for the years that had given her wisdom. I clenched the paper in my hands, my heart aching. Vanessa hadn't just humiliated me at that dinner table. She had humiliated Linda too, in my own company. The second complaint was from George Hill, an IT technician who had been at Walker Global Tech for more than 2 decades. George was 58, a man who'd walked me through more computer crises than I could count. I remembered the nights he stayed past midnight when our systems went down, his kind voice assuring nervous employees, "Don't worry, we'll get it back up." His complaint detailed how Vanessa had ordered him to work late nights on one of her personal projects, something outside his official responsibilities. When he pushed back, she had berated him in front of younger staff, calling him too slow and a relic of the old days. George had written, "I love this company, but if this is what the culture is becoming, I don't know how much longer I can stay." I shut my eyes for a moment. The thought of losing George, not because of age, but because of cruelty, was almost too much to bear. The third complaint cut deepest of all. It came from Janet Miller, 64, who had worked as a custodial supervisor for nearly 20 years. Janet was the kind of woman who knew every corner of our buildings, who treated her team like family. I'd seen her in the cafeteria smiling as she served extra rolls to young interns who reminded her of her grandchildren. Vanessa had filed a report against her, claiming Janet was unprofessional and unable to follow basic instructions. The incident? Janet hadn't been able to reschedule a cleaning shift at the last minute to accommodate Vanessa's sudden meeting. The result? Janet was quietly moved to night shifts. Reading that, I felt something inside me twist. Night shifts were hard. Janet had a bad knee and often relied on the bus. Forcing her into that schedule wasn't just inconvenient, it was cruel. At the back of the folder were printed copies of emails. The words leapt off the page like poison. "Why do we keep these dinosaurs? They hold us back. I don't understand why we waste salaries on people who should have retired years ago. We could hire fresh talent instead. These old folks don't get it. They drag the whole team down." I read each line slowly, my hands trembling, not with weakness but with anger. Vanessa's disdain for me last night wasn't a moment of stress. It wasn't about appearances at a party. It was who she was. It was in her words, in her actions, in her treatment of anyone she deemed beneath her. I set the file down on my desk and stared out the window at the city below. The streets were waking up, full of people heading to jobs that kept the city alive. People like Linda, people like George, people like Janet, people who had given decades of their lives to honest work. And Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, had made it her mission to grind them down, to make them feel worthless. For the first time since that dinner, I felt a shift inside me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about being humiliated in front of 20 strangers, or being called an embarrassment. This was bigger. It was about every person who had been made to feel small because of the lines on their face or the gray in their hair. It was about dignity. I pressed my palms flat against the desk, steady now. Vanessa thought she was clever. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she could bury these complaints and climb the ladder unchecked. But she had forgotten one thing. The ladder she was climbing was mine. And now, she was about to learn that I would not let her step on the people who had built this company, who had built me, just to make herself feel tall. I whispered into the quiet office almost like a vow. "You hurt me. You hurt them. You won't do it again." The phone rang that evening while I was still sitting at my desk, the folder of Vanessa's complaints lying open in front of me. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, didn't want to hear any more silence. But when I saw Andrew's name on the screen, my heart wavered. I pressed the button. "Hello?" "Mom," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. I wanted to say I'm sorry about last night." My throat tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "Sorry?" "Yes," he sighed. "Vanessa, she gets very stressed about hosting. You know how she is. She wants everything to look perfect. She didn't mean to embarrass you like that." I let his words sink in. He said she didn't mean it, as though humiliation had simply slipped out of her mouth like an accident. As though calling security and forcing me out of Noah's birthday had been nothing more than a mistake in planning. I stayed silent, and he rushed to fill the quiet. "But Mom," he continued, and here his tone grew even softer, like he was offering advice rather than an apology. "Maybe next time. Maybe if you dressed up a little more, something that fits better with her friends. It would help. It would make things easier." My breath caught in my chest. His words echoed louder than the roar of traffic outside my window. If you dressed up a little more? That was his solution? That was his comfort? Not that Vanessa was wrong. Not that I deserved better. Not that he should have stood by my side. No, he was asking me to change, to smooth myself into something more palatable for his wife's world. I closed my eyes, and suddenly memories rushed forward, sharp and vivid. I remembered the nights I worked 3 jobs, coming home with my feet blistered, my hands raw. I remembered leaving Andrew asleep with a neighbor while I wiped tables in a diner, praying the bus would come on time so I could make it to the morning shift at the office cleaning company. Every dollar I earned, every bone-deep exhaustion, was for him. I remembered Andrew as a little boy, hair sticking up in all directions, eyes wide with wonder. How he'd sit at the kitchen table doing his homework while I paid bills with a calculator that was always 1 digit away from empty. "Don't worry, Mom," he used to tell me when he caught the worry on my face. "One day, when I'm big, you won't have to work so hard. I'll take care of you." There was a time when he meant it. I remembered him at his high school graduation, standing tall in his cap and gown. I was in the front row, clapping until my hands hurt, tears streaming down my face. When his name was called, he glanced down at me, pride shining in his eyes. "That's my mom," he had told his friends. "She made this possible." And I remembered a night when he was maybe 12 after some older boys had pushed him down on the playground. His knees were scraped, and he cried into my shoulder. Between sobs, he had whispered, "I'll always protect you, Mom. I'll never let anyone hurt you." Those words had carried me through years of struggle. They had been a promise, a light in dark times. Now, sitting in my office, his voice in my ear telling me to dress up a little more, I realized that promise had shattered. The boy who once swore to protect me had become a man who asked me to bend, to change, to make myself smaller so his wife could shine brighter. "Andrew," I said quietly, my voice shaking despite my efforts, "do you know what you're asking me?" There was silence on the line. Finally, he answered, "I just want peace, Mom, that's all. Please try to understand. Peace." That was what he called it. But what he really meant was silence. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the city lights through the glass wall of my office. The ache in my chest was deeper than before, not just from Vanessa's cruelty, but from Andrew's weakness. I whispered to myself, as though saying it aloud would steady me. The sun who once promised to shield me now turns away, but I won't turn away. Not from this. Not anymore. My heart hurt with the memory of the little boy he used to be, the boy who had adored me, who had believed I was invincible. But those memories, as sweet as they were, couldn't erase the bitter truth of who he had become. And so, between the beauty of the past and the cruelty of the present, I found my strength. They had taken my dignity at that dinner table, but I would not let them take my voice. Not again. Not ever. After I closed the folder that night, I didn't want to act in anger. I wanted facts. I had spent a lifetime making choices by the light of reason, sending Andrew to school, paying the rent on time, signing checks for books and shoes. If I was going to do anything, it had to be with my eyes open. So I called Linda. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft and steady like it always had been. "Mrs. Walker?" she said, as if she could hear the fatigue in my bones. "Lindy," I said, "can you come by? I need to speak with you, quietly." She arrived 2 days later with her cardigan folded around her shoulders and a thermos of coffee tucked under her arm. There was a little tremor to her hands when she sat down across from me, the kind that comes from years of work and late nights, but her eyes were clear. I told her what I had found in Vanessa's folder, and I watched her face go pale, then hard. That's when I knew she understood. "Whatever you want, boss," Linda said, but she didn't relish the title. She called me boss because that's what we were to each other, long before any headlines or stock tickers. She had been with me through layoffs and IPOs, the quiet, steady presence who understood the company as well as I did. If anyone could move around this building without raising alarms, it was her. I asked her to be careful. Talk to George. Talk to Janet. Ask them how it felt. Ask them for examples. Keep it quiet. Not HR, not yet. She nodded, and with that, she became my eyes and ears. Linda's first meeting with George was easy to arrange. He was the kind of man who headed in early and left late, and she bumped into him by the coffee station one morning. She started slow, small talk about the weekend, a comment about his kid's soccer game, then eased into it. "You seemed tired last week," she said. He sighed and laughed it off at first, but then his shoulders drooped and his face shifted. "It's the new deadlines," he admitted. "She asked me to pull an all-nighter last Friday, on a campaign that wasn't even in our division. Said she needed it for a pitch. I stayed until 3 a.m. I had reports due the next day. My wife, well, she worried." Linda asked the questions gently, and he answered in pieces that added up into a pattern. Vanessa had singled him out in meetings, calling him slow and behind. She'd assigned him tasks that fell outside his job description and belittled his experience in front of younger colleagues. "It wears on you," he said. "Not just the extra hours, but the way she talks to you like you're an obstacle. Makes you doubt yourself." The way George described it, hands rubbing at his temples, voice low, sounded so familiar. I'd seen that same look in Andrew's face the night of the party when he wouldn't look at me. The humiliation doesn't only happen at a dinner table. It accumulates in office chairs, in late nights, and quiet phone calls, and it chips away at the way people walk into a room. Next was Janet. Linda found her by the loading dock, bent over a mop bucket, a blue smock tied at the waist. She'd spent 20 years making sure the lights came on and the bathrooms were clean, the small rituals that keep a company humane. Janet smiled at Linda, then her eyes filled when Linda asked if she had a moment. "It was when she needed the conference room cleaned last minute," Janet began, voice cracked like old wood. "I tried, but I had another team on the floor. I told her I'd do it at the first break. She looked at me like I'd asked her to do the impossible, said I was careless and unreliable. Next week, I was moved to nights." I could hear the bitterness in Linda's recounting, and when she paused, her hand went to her throat as if to steady her own breath. "It changed everything," Janet had said. "I have a bad knee. The bus is worse at night. My granddaughter depends on me in the mornings. The manager never asked me about my situation. It was like my years of service didn't matter." Linda told me about the nights Janet sat in the break room crying into her paper cup of coffee, about the time she came in early because her bus had been late and found a note on her locker, "You're on nights." No explanation, no conversation, just a transfer that made her life harder. Linda's notes were small, precise. She gave me dates, names, shifts. She gathered screenshots of emails where Vanessa had written off people's contributions as old-fashioned or slow. She copied the messages and printed them out and left them on my desk, quiet evidence of a pattern. One email stood out among the rest. I had read it in the folder before, but seeing it again, printed in black and white, felt heavier. "Why do we keep these dinosaurs? They hold us back." A casual cruelty typed and sent with the arrogance of someone who believed no one would notice or care. There were more. They dragged the whole team down. "We should be hiring fresh talent, not covering for dated methods." Words that could ruin a person who had spent her life doing her best. Linda also spoke to Louise, a young assistant who had once tried to defend Janet in a meeting and had been hushed by Vanessa's glare. Louise had cried when she told Linda about it, out of exhaustion, out of seeing people she admired treated like obstacles. "I felt ashamed to be part of it," she said, "like I'd chosen the wrong side." I read Linda's notes at my desk while the afternoon light shifted. Each line was a small assault, stories of people pushed, belittled, shuffled aside. It wasn't wild accusations or hearsay. It was a trail of small violences that, when strung together, spelled out a ruthless pattern. I felt anger rising, calm and white-hot. Not the kind that bursts and then fades. This was a steady resolve like the turning of gears. I had built this company on principles that had nothing to do with prestige and everything to do with people. The people who shined our floors, fixed our servers, answered the phones. Those people had made Walker what it was. And now they had been treated like disposable parts by a woman who thought scorn could be her currency. When Linda finished, she folded her hands and looked straight at me. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. I had thought about that moment 1,000 times in the hours since I found Vanessa's folder. I could have marched into HR and demanded immediate action. I could have called a meeting and read every email aloud, tearing the mask off Vanessa in a dramatic sweep. But drama wasn't the point. Justice was. Collect everything you can, I said slowly. Dates, witnesses, emails, keep copies. Don't let anyone see what you're doing. And tell them this. We will not tolerate staff being humiliated. If they're afraid, they tell you. If they need a witness, you'll be there. We'll protect them. Linda nodded, the gravity settling in her face. I'll be careful, she promised. That night I sat alone and read the transcripts she left me. George's weary voice, Janet's tears, Louise's shame. The words Vanessa had typed, cold and careless. Every line turned the heat in my chest into steel. I wasn't only angry for myself anymore. I was angry for Linda, for George, for Janet, for everyone who had been made smaller under her watch. The promise that formed in my mind was quiet and patient, but absolute. Not just for me, I whispered into the dim office. For them. You won't get away with this. I folded the papers and placed them carefully into my drawer. The next steps had to be right, firm, fair, and irreversible. But I slept that night with a different kind of tired. Not the weary surrender of before, but the solid exhaustion of someone who had decided to act. And somewhere, in the quiet between the city lights, a small, steady voice inside me said, "She will answer for what she did." The morning after Linda handed me her notes, I sat in my office staring at the neat stack of papers. Each page carried the voices of people who had been humiliated. George, Janet, Linda herself. Each one weighed on me like a stone. I had spent a lifetime building Walker Global Tech on the principle that every person mattered. I used to say it in board meetings, in interviews, even at family dinners when Andrew was a boy. Dignity is not optional. And now, here was my own daughter-in-law, shredding that very principle to pieces under my roof. I picked up the phone and dialed Human Resources. Jennifer, our HR director, answered. Her voice was brisk, professional. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker." "Jennifer," I said evenly, "I need you to process a transfer immediately." There was a pause. I don't usually call her directly for things like this, and she knew it. "Of course." "Which employee?" "Vanessa Carter Walker." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to hear my own pulse. Finally, Jennifer cleared her throat. "Mrs. Walker, Vanessa is a manager in marketing. Did you mean transfer her within her department?" "No," I replied, my tone firm. "Transfer her to the basement cafeteria. Dishwashing team, effective today." The intake of breath on the other end was sharp. Dishwashing? "Forgive me, Mrs. Walker, but that's a very significant change. People will notice. She'll almost certainly file a grievance." I leaned back in my chair, fingers pressed together. "Then let her. If Vanessa feels ashamed of where she's assigned, the shame doesn't come from the work. It comes from her own actions." Jennifer hesitated again, her voice softer now. "We've never reassigned a manager that far down the ladder. It's unprecedented." "Jennifer," I said, cutting gently but firmly, "so was forcing my custodial supervisor onto the night shift because she wouldn't rearrange her schedule for a last-minute demand. So was mocking a 61-year-old woman for taking notes by hand. So was working George until 3 a.m. for a personal project. Unprecedented doesn't mean undeserved." I let the silence hang, then continued. "Frame it as cross-training. Tell her it's part of an initiative to help managers understand every level of our operation. Make it clear this is temporary pending review, and make sure it starts today." There was a long pause. Then Jennifer exhaled slowly. "Understood. I'll make the arrangements." When I hung up the phone, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reflection. If Vanessa could look down on others so easily, then let her see what it was like to stand where they stood. Let her wash the dishes that fed her, scrub the plates that carried the meals she dismissed as beneath her. I walked to the window, the city spread out beneath me. Somewhere down there, Noah was in school, learning to spell his name, maybe still thinking about his grandmother who wasn't allowed to tell him a story at his party. One day he would understand why I had done this. Not to punish, but to protect. I placed my hand flat on the glass and whispered to myself, a vow as solid as steel. If she feels humiliated, it is because she has humiliated others. This time, she will learn. And with that, the decision was sealed. Vanessa's trial by fire, or perhaps trial by soap and steam, was about to begin. When Jennifer confirmed the transfer, I knew Vanessa would treat it like a temporary inconvenience, something she could endure until she found a way back to her comfort. But I also knew the cafeteria had a way of humbling people. There, among the steam and clatter of dishes, titles didn't matter. The work was honest, heavy, and relentless. I didn't trust secondhand reports. If I wanted to understand what Vanessa learned or failed to learn, I needed to see it for myself. So, I borrowed a maintenance uniform, tied my hair under a cap, and stepped into the basement of Walker Global Tech. To everyone else, I was just another older woman trying to make a living, and that was exactly the way I wanted it. Day 1. The dishwashing station was a world away from the glass offices upstairs. Here, the air smelled of soap and leftover food, steam rising in clouds from the industrial sinks. The machines roared and clanged, plates clattered, voices rose and fell in the rhythm of people who had done this work for years. Vanessa stood stiffly at her new post, her designer manicure already ruined. She struggled with the spray nozzle, jerking it too hard so water splashed across her apron. The older women beside her worked quickly, fluidly, as if their hands knew the dance by heart. But Vanessa was clumsy. Plates slipped from her grip, spoons clanged to the floor. At one point, she threw down a sponge with a frustrated cry. "This is ridiculous. I have an MBA. I don't belong here." The women around her exchanged looks but said nothing. They had heard words like that before, maybe not with such arrogance, but with the same dismissal of their worth. Vanessa rubbed her broken nail with a grimace, muttering, "This work is beneath me." I watched from a few feet away, mop in hand, keeping my face down. She had lasted only one day, and already she was complaining louder than anyone else. The second day was worse. Maria, the head cook, was 55, with arms strong from lifting heavy pots and a voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of the kitchen. She had raised 3 kids on this job, sending each one to college with the money she earned scrubbing pans and chopping onions. When Vanessa complained again, this time loudly enough for everyone to hear, Maria had had enough. "I don't deserve this," Vanessa hissed as she scrubbed at a pan. "I was managing a $1 million campaign last week. Now I'm elbow deep in grease." Maria turned, her hands on her hips, her hair tucked under a net. "And what's wrong with grease? This work puts food on the table for my children. This work pays for my house. This work keeps this company running. Don't you dare act like it's nothing." Vanessa scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. You think this compares to what I was doing upstairs? You don't understand real responsibility." Maria's voice rose, steady and unshaken. "Real responsibility is waking up every day and doing your job so your family survives. Real responsibility is not looking down on the people who make your life possible." The kitchen fell silent. All you could hear was the hiss of steam and the rattle of dishes. Vanessa bit her lip but didn't apologize. Instead, she turned back to the sink, shoulders stiff with indignation. I felt my chest tighten. If she couldn't respect Maria, she would never respect anyone. By the third day, the novelty had worn off. Vanessa had stopped trying to hide her disdain. "This place is full of failures," she muttered to a young man named Luis, who was rinsing trays beside her. "People who couldn't make it anywhere else. That's why they're stuck here. They're not smart enough, not capable enough to do anything better." Luis frowned, setting down a stack of plates. "That's not true. These people are good people, hardworking." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Good people? They're nobodies. They'll never be more than dishwashers and janitors. And don't get me started on that poor old woman from the party. An embarrassment. Can you imagine being proud of someone like that?" The words pierced me sharper than glass. She was talking about me, her own mother-in-law, the woman she had called security on. And now, even here, even at the bottom, she used my name like a curse. I kept my face down, my mop moving across the tiles, but inside my hands trembled. Not from weakness this time, but from rage. She hadn't learned. Not from the noise, not from the endless stacks of dishes, not from Maria's truth or Luis's quiet defense. 3 days in the cafeteria had not opened her eyes. They had only hardened her arrogance. The silent vow. As I left the kitchen that evening, peeling off the cap that had hidden my silver hair, I walked down the service corridor with heavy steps. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that Vanessa might change when stripped of her privileges, that she might see the dignity in honest work, but she hadn't. Her cruelty was not a mask she wore when stressed. It was woven into her character. I paused at the end of the corridor, my hand resting against the cool wall. "This isn't just about me anymore," I whispered to myself. She humiliated Linda, she hurt George. She broke Janet's spirit. She mocks me, even now. For all of them, for every person she's crushed to make herself feel taller, She will face the consequences. And in that moment, I knew Vanessa's trial in the cafeteria wasn't punishment. It was only the beginning. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls of my office, painting the city in gold. From up here, San Francisco looked almost peaceful, the Bay Bridge stretching out like a silver thread. But inside me, there was nothing peaceful. My pulse was steady, my mind sharper than it had been in years. At exactly 10 o'clock, Helen buzzed through the intercom. "Mrs. Walker, your 10 o'clock is here." "Send her in," I said, keeping my back to the door. The sound of heels clicked against the marble floor, hesitant at first, then quicker, as if annoyance had propelled her forward. "Excuse me," Vanessa's voice snapped. "I was told to come up here about some ridiculous transfer. I don't know why they sent me to the executive floor. There must be a mistake." I didn't turn. I let her voice echo against the glass, let her see my silhouette framed by the city below. Then, slowly, deliberately, I swiveled my chair. Her face was a mask of disbelief. "You?" she whispered, her mouth falling open. Then louder, almost hysterical, "You? You can't be—" I let the silence hang for one sharp beat, then answered, my voice calm and clear. "I'm exactly who you think I'm not." The blood drained from her face. She stumbled into the chair across from me, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. "No, this has to be a joke. You? The CEO of Walker Global Tech? For 35 years? No, you were—" "At your party?" I finished for her. "Yes. I was there, in my plain black dress with a hand-knitted sweater for my grandson. You assumed I was poor, powerless. You humiliated me, just as you have humiliated countless others." Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again. "If I had known, if you had told me," I leaned forward. "So that's what matters? Not how you treat people, but who they are. Your kind of power, cruel to the vulnerable. That's who you are, Vanessa." I slid a folder across the desk. She glanced at it, hesitated, then opened it with trembling hands. The first page. Linda Perez's complaint. Vanessa's voice caught in her throat. She was outdated. "She was loyal," I cut her off. 15 years of service. You mocked her in front of her peers. You reduced her to tears. The second page. George Hill's report. He couldn't keep up. He stayed until 3 a.m. because you demanded it. On work that wasn't his responsibility. You berated him in front of younger staff. You made a man who kept this company alive doubt his own worth. Her breathing quickened. "That's not how it happened. You're twisting things. I have high standards. And Janet Miller?" I opened the next file and read her words aloud. "Moved to night shifts because she didn't bend to your last-minute demand. 64 years old, a bad knee, responsible for her granddaughter in the mornings. You didn't care. You pushed her aside because she was inconvenient." "That's," Vanessa stammered, then her voice sharpened, defensive. "That's workplace management. Sometimes you have to be tough." "Tough?" My voice rose, firm but steady. "Is that what you call cruelty? You wrote emails calling them dinosaurs, saying they dragged the team down. Do you remember that?" Her face flushed red. "You read my emails? That's entrapment. That's spying." I stood, moving toward the window, the city sprawling beneath us. "No, that's accountability. You thought no one would notice, that no one cared enough to stop you. But I noticed. And I care." Her voice shifted, softer now, trembling. "Please, I didn't mean any harm. I was just trying to prove myself. You don't understand what it's like, being young, trying to succeed." I turned, meeting her eyes. "Don't you dare tell me I don't understand struggle. I built this company with nothing but grit and faith. I raised a son alone, working 3 jobs so he could have a chance. I know exactly what it's like to fight for survival. What you've done isn't survival. It's stepping on others so you can stand taller." Tears welled in her eyes. "If you just give me another chance, I'll change. I'll do better. Please, Margaret." Her plea broke, and for a flicker of a second I saw the fear beneath her arrogance. But then, just as quickly, the mask returned. Her jaw tightened, her eyes hardened. "This is about the dinner," she spat. "This isn't about the company. You're humiliating me because I embarrassed you. This is personal revenge." I took a slow breath, letting the weight of her words settle. Then I walked back to my desk, leaned forward, and said the truth in a voice as cold and sharp as steel. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the city beyond the glass, the muffled beat of my own heart. Vanessa shifted in her seat, her bravado crumbling around her. She looked small now, cornered not by anger but by the truth of her own actions. And as she sat there, squirming under the weight of evidence she couldn't escape, I knew this was only the beginning. Helen's voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Walker, Andrew is here." I closed the file in front of me and nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Send him in." A moment later, my son walked into the office, his tie slightly askew, his face pale. Behind him, Vanessa followed, her chin lifted high as though she were marching into battle. The air grew heavy the moment the door closed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Andrew's eyes darted from me to Vanessa, then back to me again. He looked like a man caught between two fires. I broke the silence. My voice was calm, though my heart thudded in my chest. "Andrew, you sat in silence when your wife humiliated me in front of strangers. You let her strip me of dignity at your son's birthday. Today I'll ask you one question, and I expect an answer." I leaned forward, holding his gaze. "Whose side are you on?" Andrew flinched as though I had struck him. His lips parted, but no words came out. Vanessa stepped forward quickly, seizing the moment. "She's manipulating you, Andrew," she snapped. "This isn't about the company. It's about her pride. She's using her position to punish me because I embarrassed her. Don't you see? She's making you choose between us." Her words spilled out in a rush, desperate and sharp. "You know me. You know I'm the one building our future, networking, making us stand out. And her? She's dragging you back down into her world of small thinking. If you take her side, you'll ruin everything we've built." Andrew's face crumpled. His hands clenched into fists. For a moment he looked at Vanessa with pleading eyes, as if begging her to stop. Then he turned to me. "Mom." His voice cracked. "I just want peace." I didn't flinch. Peace built on silence is not peace. Last night you watched your wife throw me out like I was nothing. And you said nothing. Today I won't allow silence. Today you choose. The room was suffocatingly quiet. Vanessa's eyes burned into him sharp as knives. I could almost hear her thoughts. Choose me or lose me. Andrew took a long breath. His shoulders straightened. And for the first time in years, I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who once promised to protect me, standing in the man's frame. He looked at Vanessa, then at me. And finally, with his voice steady, he said, "I choose the truth." Vanessa gasped, as if the words had slapped her. "Andrew, no." She stumbled forward, her hands clutching his sleeve. "Don't you dare betray me like this. She's twisting everything. I've given you everything. Status, friends, respect." Her voice broke into a wail. "If you walk away from me, I swear I'll take Noah. I'll leave, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Andrew shook his head slowly, gently prying her hands off him. "You don't need to take Noah," he said quietly, "because he's already mine, and I won't let him grow up thinking cruelty is strength." Vanessa's face twisted in fury. "You'll regret this, both of you." Her voice rose to a shriek, but Andrew didn't answer. He stepped toward me, and to my shock he pulled me into a firm embrace. "Go," he said over his shoulder, his voice suddenly cold, cutting through her cries. "Get out, Vanessa." For a moment she stood frozen, staring at him as though she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Then, with a final sob of rage, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. The slam echoed like thunder through the office. In the silence that followed, Andrew tightened his arms around me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. His voice trembled like the boy I remembered. "I should have stood up for you that night. I'll never stay silent again." I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of his embrace wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt the bond between us begin to mend. Not perfect, not whole, but real. Across the glass walls, the city stretched on, indifferent and endless. But in that moment, in my office on the 42nd floor, something broken had begun to heal. The weeks after that confrontation felt different. The air in the building seemed lighter, as though the walls themselves had exhaled after years of holding their breath. But beneath the calm, change was unfolding. Firm, deliberate, unstoppable. Vanessa did not leave. She refused to resign, convinced she could endure the temporary transfer until I softened. But I didn't. Day after day, she reported to the cafeteria in her plastic apron and hairnet. The sound of plates and trays became her new soundtrack. For the first time, she was the one avoided, whispered about, pitied. And though she carried herself with a brittle pride, every chip in her manicure, every splash of soap on her clothes, was a mirror of the choices she had made. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to those who had suffered under her hand. Linda Perez was the first. She had served me faithfully for 15 years, her patience and quiet strength holding this office together through storms both personal and corporate. I called her into my office one afternoon. She stood at the door with her notebook as she always did, expecting another list of tasks. Instead, I smiled and said, "Linda, sit down." She hesitated. "Yes, Mrs. Walker?" "You've been more than an assistant," I told her. "You've been a leader without the title. That ends today. I want you as Senior Operations Coordinator, effective immediately." Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her chest. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," I said warmly. "You've earned it 10 times over." Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time I saw her shoulders straighten with the weight of recognition she had long deserved. George Hill was next. We held a small ceremony in the atrium. Employees gathered around as I called him forward. He looked nervous, his hands in the pockets of his worn slacks. "George has kept this company alive more times than I can count," I told the crowd. "He stayed through nights when servers crashed, when others gave up. For decades, he's been the quiet backbone of our IT department. Today, I want to honor that." We presented him with a plaque, but more than that, we gave him the new role of IT Systems Supervisor, with a team under his guidance. The applause was long and heartfelt, and George's face flushed with something I hadn't seen in him before, pride unshadowed by shame. And then there was Janet Miller. I found her in the break room, sitting at a corner table with her coffee. She stood as soon as I entered, nervous, almost apologetic. "Janet," I said softly, "you should never have been moved to nights. That was wrong. From today, you return to your day shift. And more than that, you will oversee custodial operations across 2 buildings. You have given 20 years of your life to this company. It's time we honored that." Her lips trembled and she covered her mouth with her hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Walker. I thought no one noticed." "I noticed," I said gently, "and from now on, everyone will." But restoring individuals wasn't enough. I knew what Vanessa had done was not just a series of personal cruelties. It was a symptom of something larger. A culture that allowed whispers to be dismissed, that let older workers be sidelined quietly. So, at the next company-wide meeting, I stood before my employees and announced a new policy. "We are introducing the Age Dignity Policy," I declared. "This company was built on the wisdom of those who came before, and it will continue to thrive because of them. From today forward, any discrimination on the basis of age will not be tolerated. Complaints will come directly to my office. We will value every stage of life, every perspective, every contribution." The words echoed through the hall, met with nods, claps, even tears. Employees over 50, many of whom had long worked in silence, stood taller that day. Younger employees looked around with new respect, realizing perhaps for the first time that the people they had overlooked were the very ones holding the foundation steady. As the applause swelled, I felt something settle inside me. Justice had begun at my dinner table, but it did not stop there. It reached into the cafeteria, into the offices, into every corner of Walker Global Tech. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about one woman's humiliation or one family's fracture. It was about dignity, restored, defended, and woven into the very fabric of the company I had built. I glanced toward the back of the room, where Linda, George, and Janet stood together, faces alight with something more powerful than relief, belonging. And I thought to myself, this is what victory looks like. Not revenge, but renewal. Not silence, but change. The following weekend, the sky above San Francisco Bay was the kind of clear, bright blue that made everything feel possible again. The air carried the salty tang of the ocean, mingling with the laughter of children playing nearby. I spread out a checkered blanket on the grass, placing a picnic basket at the corner so it wouldn't blow away. Noah was already darting toward the sand, his small legs moving quickly, his shoes forgotten behind him. "Grandma, come on," he shouted, waving his little hands as if the whole world belonged to him. I followed slowly, smiling at the sight of him kneeling by the water's edge, his fingers busy scooping wet sand into a plastic bucket. The tide lapped gently at the shore, leaving tiny shells scattered like secrets waiting to be discovered. We worked together, piling sand high, pressing it into shapes, smoothing towers with careful hands. Noah's imagination was boundless, Every moat he carved was a river, every stick he planted was a flag. His laughter rang out like bells, filling a space in me that had felt empty for too long. When the castle finally took form, he stood back, wiping his sandy hands on his shorts. His eyes sparkled as he looked at me. "Grandma," he said solemnly, "you're the queen of my castle." The words caught me off guard. My throat tightened, my chest ached, and before I could stop them, tears welled up in my eyes. But I smiled through them, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Then you, my love, are the bravest knight." Noah giggled and wrapped his arms around my waist, pressing his cheek against me. I held him close, inhaling the scent of salt and sunshine tangled in his hair. In that embrace, I felt something I thought I had lost: belonging. A few steps back, Andrew stood watching. He had been quiet all afternoon, carrying the picnic basket, spreading sandwiches, pouring juice boxes. Now, he leaned against a tree, his gaze fixed on us. For the first time in years, his face was at peace. The furrowed lines of stress and compromise had eased, replaced by something softer: gratitude. He didn't speak, but his eyes said everything. He was remembering, too, the boy he had been, the mother who had carried him through storms, and the son who had nearly forgotten her worth. As Noah ran back to gather more shells for his castle, I sank down onto the blanket. Andrew joined me silently, sitting close but not too close, as if words were unnecessary. We both watched the child at play, our grandson and son, a living bridge between past and future. I laughed as Noah waved a stick in the air, pretending to fight dragons, but even as laughter bubbled from me, tears slid down my cheeks. Not tears of pain this time, but of release, of healing. The humiliation, the betrayal, the long silence, they would always be part of my story. But here, under the open sky with my grandson building castles, and my son finally by my side, those wounds were no longer raw. They had become scars, reminders of battles fought and survived. I glanced at Andrew. He reached for my hand hesitantly, then gripped it firmly when I didn't pull away. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. I squeezed his hand back. "We'll be all right," I said softly. "We have Noah, and we have each other." The three of us stayed by the bay until the sun dipped low, painting the water in strokes of gold and crimson. Noah's castle stood tall, its crooked towers glowing in the fading light. To anyone else, it was just a child's creation, destined to be washed away by the tide. But to me, it was a monument. Proof that love could outlast cruelty. That family, even fractured, could be mended. That dignity, once torn, could be stitched together with forgiveness and hope. As the evening breeze brushed against my face, I pulled Noah close once more, my laughter and tears mingling freely. In his small voice, in his simple faith, I found the healing I had longed for. Our family was smaller now, but warmer. Broken in places, yet stronger in the parts that remained. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The ocean stretched before me, endless and untamed. Waves rolled against the shore with the steady rhythm of time itself, erasing castles, smoothing footprints, reminding me that nothing stays the same forever. I stood with the wind tugging at my silver hair, my hands folded in front of me. The salt air stung my eyes, though perhaps it wasn't just the wind that made them water. I thought of everything that had happened: the dinner, the silence, the humiliation. The files stacked on my desk, the voices of Linda, George, and Janet. The way Noah's small arms had wrapped around me as if I were his whole world. For years, I had kept my power quiet. I had built my company without needing applause, without needing to remind anyone who I was. But silence had a price. Silence had cost me my place at my son's table. Silence had almost cost me my grandson. I lifted my face toward the horizon, speaking softly, as if to the sea itself. Power is not for revenge. Power is for protection. The words felt steady, anchored, truer than anything I had ever said. I lost my son once to silence. I will not lose my grandson to the same shadow. He will grow up knowing the truth, that dignity matters, that kindness matters, that no one is too small to be seen. A gull soared overhead, its cry sharp against the roar of the waves. I closed my eyes, letting the sound carry my vow out into the open air. Behind my eyelids, I saw Noah's smile. I saw Andrew's tired but grateful eyes. I saw the faces of the people who had trusted me to defend them when no one else would. The tide surged forward, cold water brushing against my shoes. And in that moment, I felt not small, not humiliated, not broken. I felt strong. Strong in the way only someone who has endured and still chosen love can feel. I turned from the water slowly, ready to walk back to the life I had fought for, the life I had reclaimed. But my voice lingered, an echo across the waves, a truth meant not just for me, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless at a table that should have welcomed them. If you were humiliated by your own family, I asked the sea, the sky, the unseen listener, what would you do?